Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM LP, Asheville 103.7, and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, coming out of Taos, New Mexico. Hey, thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Devine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM FM, and Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, Nave at jamesnave.com, Nave spelled Nave. And I would like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to start. So today I'm interviewing someone I've never met before. We just had a contact 2 minutes ago. She's an author. Her name is Jaclyn Goldis, and her publicist contacted me, and I was intrigued. And so I thought, why not? So Jaclyn and I are going to talk about the work she does. She writes mysteries. I wonder what's around the corner. We don't know. There might be a murder involved. Her latest book, The Main Character, well, it's about a main character, and it's set on a train. Is this a story about a hobo, or is this a story about someone who has a designer purse like a Birkin bag? We don't know, but we're going to find out. Jaclyn Goldis, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thank you so much, James. It's so good to be here. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. It's not about a hobo.
It's not about a hobo, but actually a hobo could be someone who rides in a very expensive train, because the hobo is a mindset as much as it is a circumstance. So maybe we can put the two together. We will see. So you're an author, and I was reading over your work, and one of the things I noticed right out of the gate, you love to add terrific details to your stories. So as an author who builds stories, give us a little sense of why details are important, and maybe start by telling us how many books you have to your credit, and why in the world do you do this in the first place? Details, please.
I think we could talk 5 hours about those questions. Okay, details. Well, I mostly set my books in international exotic locations because I love to travel. I live overseas. Details are the thing that bring those places alive. Whenever I teach writing workshops, I always talk about specificity. I, as a reader, like to smell a place and see it and feel it and have my senses engaged. And so I think as a writer, that's always what I'm trying to do, especially because my stories have such a big focus on place. Since my earliest memory, I've loved to write. It was always what I wanted to be when I grew up, anytime anyone asked that question. And my path was not linear. I went to law school. I mean, I didn't really think when I graduated college at 22 that I had, frankly, enough life experience or money to try doing this full time. But I was always writing books. I wrote my first novel when I was 17. I wrote 2 novels in my 20s. As I was working as a lawyer, I was still constantly writing, always feeling like this is actually what I want to do. And I'm going to save money now and have this kind of career in case the writing thing doesn't work out. But my goal was always to pursue writing as a full-time career, novels specifically. And I kept thinking I'm going to get an agent and then I'm going to leave my job. And it definitely didn't happen that way. But I eventually did save up money, leave my job. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I'm really a warm weather person, and it wasn't the right place for me anymore. And I decided to pack a backpack, and I went out and traveled the world for a year and wrote novels. So ever since then, I've been writing full time, and it took me a couple of years kind of to get an agent from that point, and then a couple more years for my books to start coming out. So this is my 3rd published novel, but I think I've written probably closer to 15 other ones to come out next year and the year after. And anyway, so now I'm on a roll. In terms of what the thread between the books is, and such a great question. It's so interesting to think about. The only thread I can really think about is that I always follow my curiosity. I never, ever write the book that I think anyone else wants or that I think that's going to be popular. I really follow what is fun to me. And I think that's how I pick setting. It's how I pick characters. It's how I landed on murder mysteries, because My first book that came out is historical fiction. And when I went to write my next, I was really thinking about, well, what am I reading all the time? And all I wanted to read was locked door, Agatha Christie like mysteries. And I decided, okay, well, I'm going to try writing one. And that's how I got into mystery now, which I love. That's the through line, is always following what I'm curious about and what feels really fun to me, because writing has to feel fun for me in order for me to be able to sit down and do it every day. I mean, I think this is a job that, unlike law, I'm picking for passion. I'm not picking just to put food on the table and to give me this secure careers. In that respect, it's like diving off a cliff sometimes. It's just like going for it, taking the risk and following what feels like the most compelling story for me to tell.
I've interviewed more than one woman who came to the creative realms by way of being a lawyer. So I'm finding that to be an interesting tie, not so much with men, but the women. I was a
Mm.
lawyer. I got really tired of it, and now I'm doing this. So what is it about, do you think, about law that moved you in this direction? And why were you dissatisfied with the law? Because the law is a very specific profession. You really do have to have the right material in the contract to make it work, or the right argument in front of the jury to get the murderer off. I don't know what kind of law you practice. Maybe you defended murderers. It's hard to say.
No, I was an estate planning lawyer, so I helped rich people structure their money and their inheritances. But I don't know that law led me here, because I always wanted to be here. I think it's more law was this side path that made sense with my skill set. And I think that makes sense that other women writers kind of also have legal backgrounds, because I wrote a lot. I mean, first of all, I have to say I enjoyed what I did. I worked with wonderful people, and I learned so much from the people I worked for that lends itself to my writing career. So I'm really grateful. I wouldn't choose a different path. One of the men I worked for in particular, the partners in my group, was just such a talented writer, and he eviscerated my contracts and my letters. And I just remember his red pen everywhere. And oh my God, I mean, he taught me to write more than I think anyone else ever, any writing professor or anyone. I really credit him with the evolution of my writing skills. And so I think that, and I also think, I was saying this to my editor recently when we were working on edits for my book coming out next year. And I said, sometimes it makes me feel like I'm back studying for the LSATs, because there's a legal games section of the LSATs. And I remember that really making my brain hurt, that scrambling feeling of like trying to fit the pieces. And sometimes when I'm writing a mystery now and I have all the clues and the red herrings, it feels like a legal games puzzle. So I think there are similarities.
Your friend, the author who took the red pen to your work, when I talk to people about writing, and you said you teach writing as well as being a writer, we don't often think of the red pen as an ally. We think of the red pen as the critical bloodletting that destroys our egos and creates writer's block. He taught you how to write. He taught you more about writing than anybody else. When you say that, can you unpack what you mean by taught, and how
Mm.
much active learning did you have to do in relationship to those red marks on the page?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that the first step in learning is being open to it. In my teens and my 20s as a writer, when I was so trying to create something that I didn't really feel like I was quite getting there, I think that there's a lot of fragility involved. I didn't think I was good enough. When I got feedback, it was an ego blow, and I'm not good enough. I'm not going to be able to do this. Sometimes it could be hard to take the feedback, because I just wanted to so defend what I had done and make it work. And think that the growth really happens when you can feel your own worth, where you can feel deserving, no matter what you've written. You're going to get there. That you're going to do this thing you want to do. Then that opens itself, I think, to the feedback. And then I think when you're getting there, because you want the feedback. Give me more, give me more. You're soaking in the criticism because it's just helping you. And I think when I got to that stage where I knew I was good, and I wasn't taking any feedback as like a statement on my own worth, then I think things really flew because I really soaked it up and it helped me up level as a writer.
It's interesting when you talk about good enough, it suggests there's a journey. We're traveling
Mm.
along in the land of not good enough. And then finally, at some point, you realize I am good enough. I'm good and I can do this and my confidence is up. You're at that place now, obviously, because you generate the work, you teach writing, and you have been at this a long time. Do you find that good enough idea remains in place, or do you have doubts as you push yourself in directions of literature that you might not have explored before?
I think if I'm doing it right, every new book feels like the hardest book I've ever written. This book I'm working on now, it's like, oh, how am I going to do this? It's the hardest book I've ever done. It's incorporating these new, maybe structural things I haven't done before. And every book I think has that push where you're like, oof. But the difference is I have done it so many times and I've done it now with big publishers and I've done it now where I have enough feedback that I know it's being received well by some people. So I know I can do it. I trust myself more because I don't want to be writing a book where it's like safe, rinse, repeat, just write this thing that feels easy. I don't want to become that kind of author. That's the sweet spot for me, is this place where I know it's going to be challenging, but I also know I can do it.
You're also touching on the essential part of what professional writers have to deal with. When you write professionally, and I have a lot of conversations with people because I teach writing and I have people that I consult with, and they go, I want to be the best-selling author. And it's a bit like someone's saying, I want to be a professional tennis player and play in the pros, and I'm just going to do this right now. So you're touching on the rhythm that one must follow, the rigor that one must follow in order to get to a place where you can, quote unquote, play pro. And not everybody wants to play pro. Just because you are a professional writer and other people I know are, doesn't mean that writing has to be exclusively moved in that direction. You can be a storyteller on multiple levels. But I do think it's important to understand that if you want to play in the arena of the professional world, you have to have some chops to do it. And building those chops happens slowly over a period of time, not overnight.
We see people that look like overnight successes, and I just don't think it ever is. The author that I've seen that you think on the surface it is, you then realize they have like 15 books behind them. I think you do just keep getting better and better with time. And then at some point, some people hit it very big, and who knows, you can't control like the best-selling piece of it. I can see my own trajectory, and that feels like pleasing to me.
So moving on from that, I now want to ask you about the book that I've been reading, The Main Character. And it's a murder mystery. And here's what I want to ask. Murder is one of the top shelf crimes. It's premium. It's the one you don't want to be involved in. Why murder? Why are you so drawn to murder? Are you a little bit of a criminal yourself? And this is the way you play it out? How can you empathize with that?
It's funny you asked that, because I think if you knew me in real life, the people who do know me in real life are very surprised that I write about murder, because I'm an optimistic person. I'm a sensitive person. I don't watch any of the really gritty true crime stuff. It's too much for me. Anything really dark, and it's not my thing. So it is funny that I write murder mysteries. Murder mystery to me in a glamorous location is more of a puzzle. It's a mechanism to have your brain read something and enjoy it, and then also work the puzzle of it. And that's what I really enjoy as a reader. So that's what I try to do as a writer. And so I think that the murder parts for me, especially like the grisly details, that part is actually the hardest part for me because it's not my natural gravitation. I wouldn't say that I have an inner criminal. I mean, it's fun. You get to like work all the emotions out on the page. So, and of course, because I write unreliable narrators, I get to write a perspective of a murder. So that's fun. But yeah, I would say that I came about it in an interesting way. I think a lot of authors who write mysteries are more into the true crime and the really grisly stuff, and that's less my thing.
I was thinking as I was reading the story, it's on the Orient Express, and it's Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express is the new version of that. And it's set in an opulent situation. So $30,000 you have to pay for your room if you are your suite, and it's very expensive. And you get on the train and you ride in the most luxurious circumstances with the most exclusive people on earth, et cetera, et cetera. I was wondering, has anybody ever been murdered on the Orient Express?
I love that question. And I mean, I don't think so. I'm not sure. So it's probably not an everyday occurrence or has ever happened. I would have, I did try to reach out to them in the course of my writing this book because I try to be really accurate. And so there was some information that I wasn't getting. No one responded to me. So that would be a fun question to ask them. I do not know. I mean, I invented this whole trip for my characters, have them going from Monaco down the Western Italian coast, ending in Positano. To me, this is a dream trip. I love the Western coast of Italy. So I just invented this for them. I mean, it didn't exist. The Orient Express actually just announced that they're doing a trip down Liguria, which is in the Western coast, starting it in June. So I feel like there's some serendipity connections between this book and reality now.
And the next thing you know, they'll be asking you to join one of the trips and give a murder mystery tour of a
If they're
fictitious thing.
listening, if they're listening, I'm free. You can call me.
So you were talking about taking your travels and going around the world. When you did that, what were some of the things that you encountered that surprised you, or maybe places where you got into a little trouble in the sense of maybe you bumped into some unsavory characters that didn't work out as well as you thought they would, that sort of thing? Little
Yeah.
adventure, little personal adventures on your part.
On my travels, I actually spent 4 months in Bali. Really one of my favorite places, and did a yoga teacher training there. And I loved it there so much. I think traveling as a woman alone, like obviously brings some caution and some fears. And I had a couple experiences in Bali. It's funny that it happened in Bali in particular, because I went all over, and Bali is known as being kind of one of the more safer places to travel. But yeah, I had a couple of incidents that weren't so fun. Like someone broke into my hotel room at night. I was punched in the face by a cab driver. I think it's why I set my books in international locations, because I think there's something so interesting when you have like the mashup of cultures. There's so many cultural differences. I also, because I live abroad, I just see it. I think that's a really interesting thing to play with when I'm writing mystery.
And changing the subject slightly, but still staying on movement, the world, culture, and the differences people have. You're talking to me from Tel Aviv. You're living in Israel now. And in the reading that I did, you talked about your grandfather or your father being in Russia during the Soviet time. And you talked about your sensitivity around all of the stuff that's going on in the world today and how it informs your work. So even though you have fiction, even though it's set in exotic locations, there's a subtext for you about things that are much more serious in the world than just a nice romp through the Orient Express having neat vodka in the bar. What about that? How are you informed by all of those circumstances? And do you have any reflections basing yourself in Israel right now, given the fact that there's a war going on and you're involved in that in one way or another, or at least likely have to be a bit? Any reflections on that and how it informs your writing?
On the piece related to my father, who grew up in Ukraine, my father's grandparents were murdered in the Holocaust and mass graves in Ukraine. His mother escaped the Holocaust. My dad was very much persecuted for being a Jew in Ukraine. I think all that informs a lot of my stories. My last novel that came out, The Chateau, has a Holocaust story, partially inspired by family history. And the main character also has like a subplot that's set in Russia, in the Soviet Union, but inspired by some of my dad's experiences. It's really important for me to tell those stories. I think I've done a lot of research on the inheritance of trauma and how subsequent generations inherit the trauma of their ancestors. And it's something alive in me. So it's something I always want to explore. And yeah, as far as me living in Israel right now, it's been such a hard time, such a heavy time, such a sad time. such a traumatic time. There's just so much suffering, and I haven't begun to process my own feelings or experience. So I can't imagine writing anything about it anytime soon. I'm sure one day it'll come out in one of my books.
How do you think trauma gets transferred from one generation to the next? And what kind of trauma do you feel, if any, in your own bones, in your own DNA being transferred from your father persecuted in Ukraine? And I know that in the Soviet Union, when it was standing, the Jewish people had a tough time. I mean, anti Semitism is something that your group has dealt with since Moses marched off, and it continues to this day, and it is on the rise. So even though the trauma is passed down from generation to generation, it's still very active now in the world. And I've interviewed a few people. I recently interviewed a fellow named Peter Himmelman, and he's a musician, but he's also, as he says, I'm an observant Jew. So he had a very, very strong intellectual position on Israel and Hamas and the rest. I got the feeling from him that he sensed that trauma. Now, of course, that trauma can be passed down to everybody. Nobody is exclusive of generational trauma. But how do you think it works, and how does it feel and land in your psychology?
When I was in fifth grade, I went to a Jewish day school, and a boy, probably from eighth grade or something, who had been to Auschwitz, like doing one of those kind of tours, came to give our class a slideshow. It was the first exposure I had to the Holocaust. And after talking about it with my parents, and I realized, my dad's grandparents died in the Holocaust. His mother escaped the Holocaust for at least a year. I had nightmares almost every night. I remember just constantly asking my father or my grandfather, could it happen again? And I saw how I remember so clearly, like my grandfather telling me, no, it can't. But I remember looking at him and saying, but you don't know. You don't know. So I think that persecution, that feeling of like anti-Semitism and not being safe lives somewhere deep in me.
And when you think about it can't happen again, that's an interesting concept. I used to think that about the Holocaust. I used to think, well, Nazis are finished, Hitler's over, it can't happen again. I've since revised my thinking, and I've noticed that it happens all the time. It happened to the Jewish people by way of Hitler, but Hitler also managed to do a lot of damage with all kinds of other groups as well. Your group
Sure.
was the major one. It happened in Rwanda. It happens all over the world all of the time. So it's always present for us. How do you deal with that now? You know it could happen all the time. What kind of psychology do you bring to the world, or how do you maintain your optimism thinking that's also a factor?
Yeah, I love that question because it gets to the core of who I am. I think for probably 15 years, I've been on a spiritual journey, and I have a lot of habits that support my well-being. I don't look at my phone in the morning, at least an hour from when I wake up. I meditate 40 minutes a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. I walk on the beach without my phone for like an hour every morning. So I think that the fears are all when you're outside of the present moment. I'm lucky enough that in the present moment right now in my life, I'm safe. When I anchor into that through these habits, my creativity keeps me in the present moment. Those are the ways that I deal with those very scary questions that are lurking somewhere in me in some capacity. But yeah, I really try to anchor myself to the now. And those are good practices for having a creative life.
I agree with you. And on that note, you teach writing, and you must bring your spiritual thinking into that. And I write, I love poetry. I'm not a professional writer, although I've earned my living as a spoken word artist for many years. So I've been around this world quite a bit. And being in the moment does bode well for one's creative efforts. Talk a bit about how you approach your teaching. Why are you motivated to do that? Why is that important? And how do you interact with your students? What are some of the things that you do to get them moving in the direction they want to move in? And I ask this because people listen to this show and they like to learn things. So you're a teacher. Give us some insight.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't even know that I really think of myself as a teacher because I only teach on retreats. I have a a close friend who owns a women's writing retreat company. And so I've gone all over the world with her teaching on her retreats. And so that's so fun for me. It kind of plays into my love for travel also. And I feel lucky because she really gives me free rein to teach on what is most exciting for me at the moment. A lot of what I teach actually is melding my spiritual practices with writing. So I think that there's a really interesting intersect between manifesting and creative writing. And I really love teaching on that. So much of the way creative writing is talked about is very, I'm not formulaic, but it's very prescribed. It's very intellectual. It's very approaching the structure very rigidly and being really intellectual about it. And that's so not how I approach my writing at all. Not to say I haven't studied structure and all that. I mean, I'm a voracious reader. And of course, I've read all the writing craft books and all of that. But I think now that that's all in me, it's not how I think about a book. I really flow with what feels good to me. And I envision this book that I want to create. I create a relationship with the book and I let the book talk to me a lot. And so that's really the cornerstone of how I write, is so much so that, my publicist asked me to write an article for Writer's Digest, who I love. And they gave me a couple ideas and they were all very intellectual ways of thinking about writing. And I said to her, I really just don't write that way. It would be very hard for me to write like, this is how to write a locked room thriller, because it's not the way I write. So anyway, I'm writing something about manifesting. Those are fun topics for me to engage with. And I think it's really fun in terms of interacting with students. I think it's really fun to get people thinking about these things differently, to not think that they have to follow this set of rules that you have to write every day because that's what this person does. It's like communicating more internally and seeing, like, trusting yourself more, trusting your own wisdom and your own path more. I think that makes for the most interesting book, and at least in my experience.
So there is the idea of writing by the seat of the pants versus engineering the book and knowing exactly where to go. And then there's everything in between. So are you advanced enough in your writing as a professional writer to have the engineering in place so that you can bring the seat of the pants vibe into the engineering and have the relationship exist between the two? I talk a lot about the idea of writing from the imaginative storm to the creative form. Let your imagination go wild. Stay in your rational mind or the creative form and put the two together and let them collaborate. So I often have read the people that write by the seat of the pants are in this camp, and then the people that are engineers generating the material from the outline are in this camp. I think they're collaborative camps. What do you think about that?
Wow, I agree with that so much. And I love how you put it. I could not agree more. I'm not either camp. Well, I do plot, first of all, but the way I plot is like not in an intellectual way. I spend probably 4 months with my notebook and I'm just going around like writing down ideas, observing things. It's just so fun for me. Every day on my morning walks, I'm thinking about, well, what if this, what if this, what if this? And somehow the book evolves. And then all of a sudden, I knock out a 15-page outline because I know exactly what it is. But it's like the book already told me what it is. And then when I go to write, I'm not pre-planning for this chapter, this person, this chapter. No, I'm flowing with what I feel, who I think is supposed to narrate the next chapter, because I usually write 5 or 6 or 7 narrators. I have to say, the 3 books I've done with my editor now, because I'm on edits for my next year's book, she hasn't changed 1 chapter around, and I haven't really either. Like once I get it into place, once I do that outline, then my flow carries me. So that's how it's been working for me so far.
So you said when you go on your walks, you don't take your phone with you. You're just down the beach, letting the seagulls inform your thinking, or the waves lapping in and lapping out, and at their return up the high strand begin and cease and then again begin. I'm thinking of ChatGPT-4 and artificial intelligence and all of the resources that we have available in the digital space to support us as we move forward. And yet, walking on the beach, letting the waves inform you, letting the seagulls inform you, letting the dream you had last night inform you, is something artificial intelligence, AI, can't do. It's not possible. And
100%.
I love that idea of letting the universe inform you through who you are or who I am. And yet here we have AI sitting there, as well as the other resources. How do you combine all of that, or do you? What is your method in terms of the digital space and all the research, and then you walking down the beach?
I actually think they go together quite well. And I actually feel very grateful for AI. I used ChatGPT just yesterday. Funny enough, I think ChatGPT could have the FBI on me. I'm always asking them questions related to murder. Yesterday, I asked something about shooting with a rifle and killing someone at close range, and it wrote, "I'm sorry, but I can't answer that." So, so ChatGPT might be reporting me. But I have to say, think that technology has its place. Of course, I can't control the collective use of it. How that transforms and transmutes is not under my control, but I can control my own usage of technology by having these windows where I'm really away from it, and where, because otherwise I just think the hyper connection and the constant connection is diminishing our creativity, not adding to it. But I think that when we are able to take those big breaks and live life outside of technology, like I do with my morning walks, which is so powerful. I always have so many things hit me on my morning walks. Then by the time I get back, I have to keep a list in my head. Otherwise, I'm forgetting it. So I'm having really random words like clock slips. I don't know. Then I have to just run home and remember what I figured out. But it's always stuff I wouldn't have figured out staring at the page. And I certainly wouldn't have figured out if I was watching TV or listening to a podcast. I think it required quiet. I mean, so far, ChatGPT has enhanced my ability to do research. So, like, it's been an amazing tool. I'm very skeptical that ChatGPT is ever going to write a book like Jaclyn Goldis and it's going to somehow spit one out. I don't believe it. I think that there's limits to what technology is going to do, and human capacity is just greater. I flow with what life is going to bring. I can't predict.
Yeah, I use ChatGPT to find out about color. So if I like a color that's, say, blue, for example, I will say, give me 15 hex colors that match the color blue that I can use on my Canva posters. 20 seconds later, I have
Love
15
that.
colors and I can match them up. So
Wow.
it's a terrific research tool. Sometimes what I'll ask Chat GPT to do is create an image about whatever the scene is. Create an image about walking on the beach, and then give me the hex colors that are in that image. I can use those hex colors to create my own poster or own template for Instagram that might give a feel for something I'm trying to communicate. I really love the way all of this stuff works. Switching slightly away from the digital space and yet still staying on it as we move toward the time we have to say goodbye, people want to be published. That's the one of the main things I think I hear when I work with people who write. I want to be published. I want my book to be out there. They often don't realize that in publishing, to get a book from manuscript form on your desk into the form that appears on the bookshelves cost a great deal of money. It's really not much different than making a car in terms of generating a product that fits in a line that goes on a shelf that works for the season of the publishers working with, like the Christmas season or the holiday season or the spring launch season. So, what are some of your thoughts on how to help people have a relationship with publishing that would be healthy rather than so competitive to get the bestseller?
It's really interesting. I don't know that my perspective is like every author, because I've heard people go both ways on this, but I've heard some authors describe it as they don't enjoy writing the book, but they enjoy when it's done. They enjoy when it's finished. But to me, that is just really not how I approach it. Like, if I don't enjoy the writing of it, to me, it feels like, why? Yes, I've always wanted to be published because I've always felt that this is my path. And it's so fun to share my books with the world and to have this interaction with readers. The thing that really drives me in the process is writing the book. I love it. I usually write the second half, like usually the first half of the book takes me a few months to write. And then the second half, I usually write in a month. And in that month, when I am feverish, it's just pouring out of me. That month is really just dedicated to my book. It's pouring out of me. I'm the happiest I am the entire year. It's just so much fun. I'm loving it. To me, that's the greatest joy of the entire process, far more than being published. So I feel like what I would tell people is focus on that. Like focus on making the writing process and the book the most fun. And then I think from that, publishing becomes easier. I think that it's kind of natural that a book that's really fun to write could be successful. How the journey goes is kind of also the destination. That's my biggest advice.
Well, it seems like the joy you bring might transfer energetically into the story that one reads, and that's why it becomes a little more sticky than other stories. If you weren't writing professionally, what would you write? Or would you still have the same momentum? Friends who write professionally, Alan Wolfe, he's a young adult author. He's written 15 books for Candlewick Press. Al has been at this all his life. I imagine he would write even if he didn't have a contract, but he is rather motivated because he does have his contracts. So have you thought about that? And what do you write that you don't publish? Do you have a focus outside of your publishing career in the writing arena?
Well, I would absolutely write if I wasn't being published. I think that I will be writing until the day I die. I actually saw an author say this recently, that if she found out she was dying, if she only had 3 months to live, she would stop and just enjoy her life. And I was really thinking about that because I would keep going. It's so fun for me. What would I write if I wasn't writing this? I can't say that there's anything else right now. If I wanted to branch into something else, I would. I wouldn't be afraid of trying a new genre. I actually have a middle grade book that my agent's selling. So we'll see what happens with that. That's like an interesting genre for me to write in that I'm excited by. And I'm very into health and wellness and spirituality. So maybe something in those areas someday.
I'm thinking of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who owned the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco, and he was friends with George Whitman, who owned Shakespeare and Company in Paris. You may have drifted through Shakespeare and Company in your sojourn in Paris, since you travel all over the world. He published his last novel on his 100th birthday.
Wow.
And I've often thought, as a writer, what would be the last line I wrote before I died? And would I be writing that line in the moment of my departure from the earth? This is it,
Wow.
the last line. There's nothing else. I died. And there it is on the page, the last line I wrote. Of course, who knows? We all will write the last line. And
Yeah.
that might be an interesting title for a book, now that I think
Wow.
about
I
it.
love that.
The last line. From that last line would be the mystery of something that was buried deep in the author's story that the people discover as they research.
I love that. You might have just given me a mystery idea. Maybe someone was murdered for that last line.
Well, I'm just saying there,
I
I won't even take credit for it, but it is an
Will
interesting
you be my
idea.
brainstorm partner?
I can brainstorm, believe me, I can be your brainstorm partner. You want to brainstorm, I've got plenty of it. But that is an interesting idea. The last line.
It is.
And
Yeah.
where is it? The last moment? Because I always think of death as something that we're afraid of. And of course, I'm not particularly excited about having it arrive today. And yet, it probably is a very simple proposition.
Yeah.
1 second and you're no longer there. The last breath, the last line, the last thought, it gives me pause. And it gives me pause in a positive way. Because if you can strum that last chord, Willie Nelson, 92, still playing. Fellow yesterday said he went to see Bob Dylan, 81 years old, an hour and a half concert, stood at the keyboard the whole time as if he was 21 years old. So that's a beautiful idea. As we move toward the final time together, tell us how we can connect with you. Where do we go? What do we do? How do we acquire your stories?
I'm Jaclyn at Jaclyn Goldis at Instagram. That's generally where to find me on social media. My website's jaclyngoldis.com. And yeah, my books are sold in most places where you can find books. The main character is my next murder mystery, and it's out May 21st.
Well, thank you, Jaclyn, for being with us on Twice 5 Miles Radio. I could go on and on. I have a zillion other questions to ask, but the hour requires that we close it down. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, James. I've just loved this conversation.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Jaclyn Goldis. If you would like to reach her, like she said, she's on Instagram. She spells her name Jaclyn Goldis. And her website is jaclyngoldis.com. Again, she spells her name Jaclyn Goldis. jaclyngoldis.com. So now I hope you have a better sense, by way of our conversation, about what is required to put a book together. The most important point, I believe, from this conversation is the fascination and joy and pleasure one gets from writing. I love the way that Jaclyn described her sense of engagement because of how much she enjoyed it. Does it seem like work? I suspect not. It seems more like play, especially if you're really enjoying yourself. So that's how you measure writing. That's how you measure your commitment to writing. Do you enjoy it? Does it stir you up? Does it make you happy? Or do you enter this state of flow like you would step into a stream, or from a kayaking point of view, or a canoeing or rafting point of view? You launch your boat, your raft, your canoe into the stream, and then you guide it through the flow. You and the flow working together to make your way down to the takeout, wherever that happens to be, a mile or two, or maybe a 3-day trip down a river. So if you never kayaked, rafted, or canoed down a river, you probably have stood by a river or a stream and watched it flow by. You've also taken a shower, and in the shower you get the same experience. You connecting with the flow of the water. There's something delightfully hypnotic about it. That's probably why a lot of people will tell you some of their best ideas come when they're in the shower. They're relaxed, they're in the flow or standing under the flow, allowing the flow to happen, and in that relaxed flow state, something pops up, some idea that's useful or some idea that's just entertaining or delightful. Of course, you don't need to be in the water to be in the flow. Jaclyn noted that she takes a walk, and during her walk, something happens, something pops up. Fragmented, she jots it down, comes back home, and takes what she's written down and puts it into another kind of form, and eventually some of those ideas make it onto the page, make it into her story. The point, of course, is the idea of flow belongs to all of us. It's very easy to go on a walk and feel that state of flow, or get in a conversation and also feel another kind of flow. The state of mind, state of physicality, state of emotionalism, state of psychology, even the spiritual state also comes into play here. I'll repeat, comes into play, because I think play and flow go together. And when we're playing and when we're flowing, we feel good. It creates a sense of chemistry in our psychology that warms our heart, that makes us more generous, that makes us more open. And once that happens, the need to tighten up, to button up, to get it all right, spreads out a bit. Actually, sometimes it just dissipates altogether, and you don't really care if you're getting it right. What you're doing is having the experience, enjoying what's going on, and generating a story that flows, a story that people can connect with. It's good to keep in mind that if you're connecting to the flow of your story, you can be sure someone else will as well. It doesn't really matter if it's one person or 100 or 10,000. If the energy's there, if the flow's there, there's a collective sense of belonging that we all experience. And in that collective sense of belonging, we include ourselves in the story. So if your story has flow, it has energy, it has emotional connection coming from something inside of you that you want to tell, I will connect with it, or your audience will. I being one of the members of your audience, I'll connect with it. And when I do, I will begin to think that's my story, as much as it really is your story. So there we are, back to that collective sense of flow, which belongs to all of us, just like infinity belongs to us, creativity, and all of the many other things we do collectively. Sure, we're individuals. Your story is not mine. And yet, our stories have a similarity because we're bringing elements together in our stories that we both understand. Say, for example, if you tell a story that includes some stress around feeling like you're getting ready to run out of gas, you look at your gas meter and it's almost on empty, and you have 15 more miles to go, and you hope between the time you realize your gas meter is telling you it's almost on empty and the 15 miles, you'll find a place to refuel. And you also have the stress of thinking, well, if I don't and I run out of gas, I'll be stranded out here on this road. Most people who drive cars, somewhere along the way, have had that experience. That's why some of them will always fill up when the needle gets to half a tank. I'm one of those, actually, because I really don't like the stress of trying to cut it short and running out of gas. I can't say that I've ever run out of gas, but I can say that I have sometimes almost run out of gas, and here's why. Because I'm one of those characters who likes to save 3 cents on the gallon. Now, 3 cents over 10 gallons is 30 cents. I have been willing to almost run out of gas and risk my trip to save 30 cents. I don't know what that psychology is. You may have had that same experience. I'm offering you an example of flow. Now, I know gasoline flows into the tank, right? But more than that, if I include the gas story, refueling story in one of my stories about maybe a fictitious character, or even in my own memoir, you will understand a bit of what I was experiencing emotionally. So when I think about getting in the flow, I also think about allowing my emotions to flow out by way of simple, ordinary descriptions around filling up a gas tank, or shopping in a grocery store, or ordering food in a restaurant. All things that we've done. All things we can share, ordinary things. And even though they're ordinary, things you don't give much thought about, things you do every day, the ordinariness of it is what makes it interesting when you include it in a story, is that it's ordinary, commonplace, and yet unique all at the same time. Each time I fill up my gas tank, the circumstances are different. The people are different in the area around me. The gas price is different. The temperature is different. One day I may be in a big hurry trying to get out as fast as I can. Another time when I'm filling up my tank, maybe I have nowhere to go. Maybe it's an easy afternoon. Maybe I'm going to the river to enjoy some bird watching. The vibe changes from being in a hurry to going to the river to watch the birds. So the flow can take you anywhere creatively. If you're not used to being in the flow and you're a bit more buttoned up, as many people will tell you they might be, then the flow can be a bit uncomfortable, because flow creates mess. And of course, mess is often seen as failure. When you were growing up, how many times did somebody say, clean up your room, it's really messy, don't be so messy? And then you cleaned up your room, and when your room was in order, it felt good. And yet, when your room was messy, there was a vibe around that as well. Mess and order have a relationship. You start with mess, and you take it into order. And so when you're in the flow, you're not so fussed about whether it's messy or not. You're happily disconnected from getting it all right out of the gate. So when you stay on the ordinary, like pumping gas, and you cease to worry so much about exactly how you're going to tell the story, you have a much better chance of writing something down that will have some energy and some magnetism. And when you think about it, you can develop almost anything into a story, even though it might not seem like it's all that important in the moment. Large things, small things are all happening every moment we live. And some of those large and small things we witness, and other things we don't. We've all had plenty of close calls, like ducking into a pizza restaurant in a big city and having an air conditioner fall on the sidewalk 2 seconds after you entered the cafe. Most of the time, the air conditioner misses you. You may have had one fall on your head, I don't know. It goes both ways. Every second counts. Every movement you make counts. No matter what you do, large or small, it changes the world around you. And that change is what you can write about. That's where the stories come from. And another thing to remember about all this, writing allows you to speed up the process of understanding the complications in your life. Writing slows you down, especially when you do it longhand, and it allows you to access the emotional truth of your memories. And of course, everything you have is built into your memories. Now is now. What's happening right now becomes a memory, just like what I'm saying right now passes It's a memory, and now I'm saying this instead, and on it goes. So by slowing down, being in the moment, and writing about things from a messy point of view, you relax. Things bubble up, you organize things in a way that you might not organize if you were more buttoned up. It's like spinning the kaleidoscope and stopping and looking through the lens and seeing whatever configuration has fallen in that moment. So here's something practical you can do to allow yourself to experience this. After you finish listening to this show, take a moment and list 5 things that happened to you, large or small. I just took the moment, and here's what I listed. 1. I missed my international flight from Albuquerque in January. 2. Yesterday, I repaired my back bumper with a heat gun. It's a plastic back bumper that was hit in a parking lot. 3. This morning, I met my friend A.D. at Dynamite Coffee in Black Mountain, North Carolina. 4. 3 weeks ago, I drove 1,500 miles in 2 days from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Asheville, North Carolina. And 5. My mother died 5 years ago during the first week of March. Number 5 is, in some ways, more significant than, say, missing my international flight from Albuquerque in January. Even so, each incident is full of stories. Why did my back bumper get hit? What kind of parking lot was I in? How long did I wait until I found a heat gun to repair it? How about my friend A.D.? How long have I known him? How come we met at Dynamite Coffee? What about driving 1,500 miles from Albuquerque to Asheville? Would you like to hear what moved me to stop along the way in New Mexico and visit Billy the Kid's grave? It might seem like the most important item on the list of 5 would be my mother's death 5 years ago, and yet they're all linked together in one way or another. So when you write, and you go into those memories, when you write and you explore all of those things, those ordinary gas-pumping circumstances, you never know what you might come up with. And as Jaclyn and I discussed, it's not about whether you are a professional writer or a professional storyteller, or whether you're just doing it because you're moved to do it. The point is, when you engage in your own life in a creative way and express what you remember, how you want to tell it in some kind of creative way, some sort of delivery system on the page or orally as I'm doing now, you will find you'll gain a deeper understanding of who you are. And in that discovery process, you'll begin to understand more about how you fit in with the people around you. You'll gain a little more empathy, perhaps, if you'd like some more empathy, certainly more insight. You might have a few answers that pop up along the way that you didn't expect. And that's all really important, because when you're telling your stories, you're always delving into the mysteries of your life. You're finding out things you didn't know you knew. You're discovering secrets that are hidden. You may not be writing murder mysteries like Jaclyn Goldis, and yet you're exploring the mysteries in your life and the mysteries around you. And if you like murder mysteries, you can always go to JaclynGoldis.com and check out her new book, The Main Character, along with her other books as well. So, keep exploring your own mysteries. Keep exploring the ordinary. Pump that gas, but every time you pump gas, or every time you're doing something that you think is ordinary, stop for a moment and just say to yourself, how is the best way I could possibly remember this situation? Pay a little bit of attention to the ordinary. And when you do, magic happens. Suddenly the ordinary becomes a memory that might stand out for a long time in your life. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM. In downtown Asheville on Wall Street, Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI FM, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Both stations are community radio stations, and we like community radio because it allows us all who broadcast to do things like this show that I've just done now. I would love it if you would reach out to me and tell me a bit more about your story. Nave@jamesnave.com is how you can reach me. Please feel free to do it. My door is open. I would love to hear from you. I'd like to also remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, get a little bit more honed in that messy thinking, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to start that process. Also, I am doing a writing workshop with Alan Wolfe, Nicole Brown, Sebastian Matthews, and other guest speakers, May 19 through 25, 2024. It's called the Lake Eden Writing Week. And we will gather for a week on the grounds of Lake Eden, where the Leaf Festival is held. If you're living in Asheville, you'll know about the Leaf Festival likely. It's a beautiful spot. I'm actually here now, looking out the window. I am in the house where we will be holding the workshops. It's a big, rambling, beautiful house built by E.W. Grove in 1923. It's on the National Historic Register, along with other buildings on the site. This is the former campus of Black Mountain College, so there's a very creative vibe here. Anyway, jamesnave.com if you would like to learn more about this writing gathering. I have room for about 4 more people, so maybe you'll be one of them. And on that note, thanks again for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio. I really do appreciate it. And hey, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.